Welcome, everybody. Ani Bojo. We're here today, Native Child and Family Services of Toronto. My name's Terry Jaffe, and I'm going to be your host, the MC, for our fourth webinar in our Decolonizing Child Welfare Learning Series. Really excited today to be working with the Family Finding team to be talking about our Family Finding program. You're seeing our agenda, which is coming up. So point number one, welcome from me. So again, welcome everybody. And most importantly, before we go any further, I want to introduce knowledge carrier Vivian Roy and ask Vivian to open us up in a good way.
Miigwech Terry, thank you for that, Terry. I was asked to say an opening this afternoon actually, sorry. I'm still in the morning, but I'm going to get started. Maybe you could take a moment of silence for yourself. Just sit and listen to the words. I will give them back to you in English when I'm done. Bonjour, giwid no pwede in English and kango. Main gando dem. Mina week pam kong do the bendag was one PC with Toronto don chinaki minando da. Kegoni ke pit. Joam nido. Quick pitch me go nangwa we not mo siyang. Shoem nido. Not mo siyang. We minamad siyang. Mina we minakiyang. Nakna kundok ninok. Mina kuyok mampian nam the bot. Not moge noge. We minamanayat. We minagigayat. Mina we minoan mat. Creator, I ask you today to help us live in a good way and help us to walk in a good way. Creator, I also ask that for my peers, for all these men and women who are sitting in the Zoom circle today, I ask you to help all of us work with one another in a good way and to speak with good words. Help us to hear and to continue walking this way. And Chimigwe Chips and Doshik, thank you for listening. I'll pass it back over to you, Terry, to move along.
Which Vivian, thank you for your good words. When we were preparing today and kind of practicing, we were identifying Star Wars characters and trying to find new ways to introduce people. And I realized that Vivian didn't play the game. So I'm going to just say that Vivian represents the Force. It's just that Vivian is a Force and represents the Force. But I'm going to now introduce Dr. Jeffrey Schiffer. Hi, Jeffrey. I think you're here somewhere. And I know you were playing along well with the Star Wars theme, all hinging on Darth Vader. And so I just want to welcome you. And I know you've got some good words to ground us and get us going in our webinar today.
Miigwech, yeah. It really, Darth Vader is quite the guy. I just want to start by thanking Vivian for starting us out in a good way, for anchoring us and grounding us in a good way as we set forth to talk a little bit more about our learning series on decolonizing child welfare. I was reflecting on this. I mean, this learning series was part of 3 commitments that we made on September 30th when we got together last year and talked about some of our new direction at Native Child. And really, this was meant as a process for us to really articulate how practice works at Native Child, what we've done historically, what we're doing in a good way, and to form as sort of a baseline, as a foundation for us as we continue to gather with community, with stakeholders, with First Nations, around all of the work that we have ahead of us, right? To change, to whatever word you want to use, decolonize, transform, reform, the system that we inherited, the child welfare mandate. And today we get to discuss one of the really exciting pieces that has been developed at Native Child over the last 3 years. It's our kin finding team, and reflecting on that too, it just makes me think. I mean, we took on the mandate in 2004, and without question, trying to identify family members, extended family members, community members, kin, to care for children when they do temporarily need to come into the child welfare system is something that we have always tried to do at Native Child. But the funding that was available to do that until quite recently was underwhelming, right? And this is one of the areas where we can really see in clear ways the way that transformation needs to be resourced sufficiently for us to be able to do this work together with community. So a number of years ago, when new funding was available through the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, we had an opportunity to access additional funds, in ways that would develop a specialized kin finding team, is what we started to call it. And you'll hear how that name has changed by some of the folks leading that work shortly. But for me, what I think is important is that we've got this new context of C92. We've got this new context of Bill 84, which people may not know about on this call, but it's going to change the way that we're able to do customary care. And we have this new context at Native Child where we now have a full team designated to finding family and community connections in ways that keep children out of child welfare. These are options for kids that are out of care options, and for us that's really important, right? Because it keeps kids together with families and communities and out of the child welfare system. And I think when we reflect on the historical overrepresentation of Indigenous kids in the child welfare system and the work that still needs to be done to reduce that overrepresentation in ways that are connected to community and culture, this team is a striking example of that, right? And I think that we are blessed to have some of the people here today who have been leading that work, who will share the voices of community that have been impacted by this new capacity that we've had. And there are so many teachings here for us, not only at Native Child, but I think as a sector, as we think about the way that we move as Indigenous organizations together with community to transform the work that we do. So I just, with that, want to thank you all for joining us. I want to say, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from across the country. And I want to turn things back over to Terry, because today really is about hearing from the team. So with that, I'll just say Chimigwech. Thank you, Terry.
Before we get started with our family finders, I just want to let all our guests and the people in the audience know a little bit about our agenda and our format. So we've had our opening and we've been grounded and gotten things started in a good way. We're going to hear from Marianne Rice and Tammy Ferguson. Marka Tanasoff has a small presentation. Of course, we're going to listen to words from Vivian, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers. So if you've got questions, we definitely want to hear them. If you're listening and a question comes to mind, you don't have to wait till the end. You can always type it into the Q&A at any time, but we will answer all the questions at the end of the session. I think it's pretty easy to find. Just look for the button on the bottom that says Q&A and type in your question, and then I'll read those out at the end. You can direct your question to whichever presenter you want, or the presenters will decide. So I think that's all for housekeeping. So I want to now turn it over and introduce Marianne Rice and Tammy Ferguson. Hi, Marianne. Hi, Tammy. Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi, Terry. Thank you very much. So I guess I have three names now. So my Star Wars name is Princess Leia. My English name is Marianne Rice. That is the name that I was born with. And my spirit name is Sits by Fire. I am Haudenosaunee from Quebec through my father and Scottish descent through my mother. I have been in child welfare for about 18 years, and for the most part as a kinship worker. And I've been at Native Child for the past 3 years. I started off as a resource worker on the Permanency team. I am very passionate about keeping children and youth connected to their family, community, and culture. Tammy, I'm going to pass it over to you for your introductions.
Thank you, Marianne. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tammy. I'm a member of the family finding team. I've worked in the field for just over 20 years in different roles, and I've been on the family finding team since it started. Before that, I was also working in kinship. I've always been very passionate about children remaining with family and keeping family connections. When I was about 2, I went to live with my grandparents, my uncles, and my auntie. And that was my home until I left to go away to university. I really feel that if my family wouldn't have came forward with a plan for me, that my life would have had a very different outcome. One thing that I learned that I'd really like to share is that if a child can't be with their parents, it is so natural for the child to be with other family members that growing up, I never thought there was any difference between my family situation and my friends' families my friends who lived with their parents. And my friends didn't see a difference as well. So I just wanted to highlight that because I just think it's so natural that there is no difference. The only difference to me was that I had a really large family compared to everybody else because there were so many of us that lived together. So that's my journey so far that has led me to where I am now today. So I'd also just like to welcome everyone and thank everyone for being here today.
Perfect. Thank you, Tammy. So in 2018, Native Child and Family Services of Toronto began the journey of providing Toronto's Indigenous community family finding services. It was initially called kin finding. This was due in part to the influx of Indigenous children into care and the acknowledged difference between Indigenous and non-Indigenous approaches to parenting. Child welfare has increasingly acknowledged the significance of culture, and there is a greater recognition of the nexus between cultural strength and children's well-being. Native Child and Family Services, the family finding team, is dedicated to building and/or maintaining a lifetime of family support networks for children who are disconnected or at risk of disconnection from their family, community, or culture. Wahotowin. In the Cree language, Wahotowin means kinship. It refers to the concept that everything in creation is related. And I think that's very obviously the grounding for kinship is the language as well, bringing that culture to what we do as a family finding team. Before we get into the full presentation, I would just like to explain the difference between kin service, which is what we do on the family finding team, and kin and care, which has distinct and separate standards mandated by the ministry. So kin are individuals who have a relationship with a child or youth and may include biologically related kin or individuals without a biological connection, but with significant social connections. Kinship service occurs, also known as kin out of care, when a child or youth is placed in the home of an approved kin, but the child does not have in-care status. The Ontario Kinship Service Standards were issued on November 30th, 2006, and it is my understanding that they are currently being revised by the ministry. Kinship care occurs when the child or youth is officially a child in care of the society. So this is kin in care. Both kinship care and kinship service are programs that allow children and youth to be placed in the care of people they know, usually members of their extended family or community support group. The key difference between these two programs is that a child or youth cared for by a kinship caregiver is not deemed to be in the care of the children's aid. A kinship service family participates in a screening assessment that explores the family's ability to meet the safety and well-being needs of the child, which we will be speaking about later on in this presentation. A kinship care provider, on the other hand, is a caregiver who, like a licensed foster caregiver, is required to attend a provincially mandated pre-service training program and participate in a home study, which is called Safe and Pride, or the Indigenous format of that is Heart and Spirit. Kinship care families receive the same financial and emotional support from the CAS as foster families. Kinship service families do not, and we'll explain that further in our presentation as well. So the guiding principles of the family finding team is dedicated to building and maintaining family support networks for children and youth who are separated or at risk of being disconnected from their home, traditional communities, and culture. The Family Finding Services team ensures that the spiritual, physical, emotional, and mental well-being of Aboriginal children, youth, and families remains healthy and strong by exploring and nurturing crucial family and community networks meant to last a lifetime. Family finders seek to empower and improve outcomes for our children and youth by encouraging decision-making and planning with parents and caregivers who are unable to provide immediate care while on their journeys of healing and recovery. Our practice is grounded in admission prevention network building through the identification of relatives or supportive adults who may be estranged or unknown to our families. We recognize that the families we work with may have relocated to other communities across the province, and Canada and may have lost touch with significant relationships. By reaching out and reconnecting, the Families Finding Services team seeks to reestablish important bonds, especially with those who are willing to provide permanent, meaningful relationships for children and youth in our care or in need of alternate care placements. There's no boundaries when it comes to family finding. That's our motto here on the Family Finding team. So Bill C-92 is a federal act respecting First Nation, Inuit, and Métis children, youth, and families. So that's something that Trudeau has done for us. And it's a really important act that really grounds the work that we do in family finding. So these are the highlights from this act. Indigenous siblings should be kept together, provided it is in their best interest. Indigenous children in care keep strong emotional ties with their family and stay connected to their communities and culture. There is an ongoing obligation that I really want to highlight that for as long as we are working alongside a child or youth, we have to continually relook at the options that we have for them to remain connected to their family, communities, and cultures. And to reassess the possibility for an Indigenous foster child to reside with one of the parents or an adult member of their family. When an Indigenous child is not placed with a member of their family, their attachment and emotional ties to family are to be promoted. So Bill C-92 is based on 3 principles. It is the best interest of the child to be a primary consideration wherever a decision or action is taken, to ensure cultural continuity, and to promote substantive equality between that child and other children. There is an order for priority of placement that needs to be consistent with the best interests of the child. First, it is with parents. Second, with family. Third is the same Indigenous community group or people. And then the fourth would be others. And placements with or near siblings must be considered. And that is also a priority that exists for Native Child and Family Services. Priority is also given to prenatal care, which is likely to be in the best interest of the child after birth to prevent placement at birth.
So the 2 different roles that the family finding team takes on are family finding and kinship service. So I'm just going to explain what they are and what's different and what the similarities are. So family finding, we identify potential caregivers when an alternate placement is required. We assist with connecting children to their unique culture and or community if known. We support the youth or child with connecting with their biological parents, siblings, and extended family. And we provide cultural support to kin caregivers, youth, and children as needed. For family finding, we use a variety of tools to search for and connect with extended family, to build a community of support for children and youth. And then kinship service, we complete an initial kinship assessment and a comprehensive assessment when a potential caregiver has been identified. We provide financial supports in the form of monthly per diems, startup funds, and gift cards. We provide cultural items and resources to the caregivers as needed. And we honor the unique joys and challenges that kinship service caregivers encounter, and we assist with navigating the challenging child welfare system. We also support the child and family well-being worker to ensure that the kinship placements are a safe and viable option and that the child can maintain connections to their family and culture. So family finding is not just about finding potential alternate placements for children. The family finding team also makes it a priority to search for connections for children and youth. Connections within their extended family, their community, or with kith, which is any person who is not biologically related to the child. There are no boundaries when it comes to family finding. So I'm just going to share one of the success stories from one of the members on the team. So family finding recently connected a mother and son, JR, who had not seen each other in 16 years. JR mentioned having a picture of his mother in his sacred bundle and how he hoped for reunification for many years now. When family finding connected with mom, she expressed how she also dreamt of this unification for many years and that the timing couldn't have been any better. Due to the restrictions of COVID-19 and the stay-at-home order, Family Finding and the Children's Services worker knew they had to be creative so that they could make this happen as soon as possible. They then connected the two via Zoom, where they instantly made great connections. They both had lots of questions for each other and were able to identify similar hobbies that they enjoyed, especially both being great artists and enjoying drawing superhero characters. Mom was also able to introduce JR to his younger siblings, and JR expressed excitement about being an older brother. They continued to meet weekly via Zoom and had numerous overnights. As JR continues to reunite with his family members, Family Finding is working on a genogram to capture all his connections. It was a joy to witness this reunification for them both, as Family Finding continues to make these wonderful connections to the family.
So referrals to the Family Finding team. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about how we get our referrals. So when a child is moved to a place of safety, the Family Finding team is notified immediately and a family finder is assigned. The supervisor, which is myself, and the assigned worker attend the 72-hour meetings to gather information on how Family Finding can support the family, as well as any possible leads on family or community connections. Child and Family Wellbeing also sends referrals to Family Finding when there is a risk of removal to explore kin connections and as a preventative plan to support the family. Child and Family Wellbeing will also make referrals as part of pregnancy planning. Family Finding can explore potential kin so that, if needed, the infant can be placed with family upon discharge from the hospital directly after birth. Family Finding also receives referrals from the Children's Services Long-Term Care Team for children and youth to build cultural, community, and family connections. So as mentioned before, we have the initial kinship assessment when we have potential caregivers that step forward to present a plan. And through a series of interviews with the identified caregivers, this assessment focuses the interviews on a couple of areas. First of all, the caregiver's relationship with the child and parents. This includes parenting practices, discipline, managing of special needs, how the caregiver will support access with parents, because that's a priority as well. What supports the caregiver will require to provide adequate care to the child, and a brief summary of the caregiver's childhood and current life circumstances. The family finder will also request the following documents be provided: criminal reference checks for all adults over 18 residing in the home, to sign consents for child welfare checks, medical report from the caregiver's family doctor, and a home safety to ensure that it's a safe home for the child. And depending on the relationship between the potential caregivers and the child, access visits may be scheduled as part of the assessment or to assist in building the relationship between the child and the kin family. These visits often start off at our Native Child Access Center and then move to the caregiver's home when appropriate. There is a no one size fits all when it comes to how these visits occur. We tailor these visits depending on the needs of the family as well as of the child to ensure a successful transition into the caregiver's home. Once the initial assessment has been approved by the family finding team and Child and Family Wellbeing, then we decide on a date when the child can be formally placed in the kin home. After placement, both the child and family wellbeing worker and the family finding team continue to support the home to ensure that the placement is successful. There is a lot of teamwork and we work hand in hand to support our families and children.
Permanency planning is a vital aspect of the kinship assessment. While the goal is always reunification with parents, we also need to ensure that if required, caregivers will be able to provide permanent care for the child. Discussions on permanency planning will take place on an ongoing basis, and we honor the journey that kin caregivers take to provide permanency. So the comprehensive assessment. The comprehensive assessment is completed 90 days after the child has been placed in the kin home. The focus on this assessment is on how the child has transitioned into the home and how the kin family has adjusted to the placement. We can also add any information that was not included in the initial assessment due to time restraints. The purpose of this assessment is to ensure that the caregivers are receiving the support that they require and that the child and family have adjusted well to the placement. It is also a good time to review the permanency plan to ensure that everyone is aware of the expectations regarding permanency.
So there have been a few occasions when we have not been able to approve potential caregivers for a variety of reasons, including caregivers themselves making the decision that they cannot move forward with the placement. This is a difficult decision, and we put a lot of thought into making these decisions. We always look at creative ways to keep families connected, even if we do not place. And this is also a priority for us. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about how we worked to be creative in ensuring that a youth was connected to his family. So family finding continues to work diligently to ensure families remain connected. Family finding has connected a child in extended society care to their biological siblings who were adopted through another agency. Family finding connecting with the society involved in the adoption, who then connected to the society who supervised the adoption. So there was a couple of different CASs involved at that time. And this society contacted the adoptive parents who were very happy to connect with the family finding worker to ensure the siblings were connected. We began the connection by sending and receiving pictures and letters from the adoptive family, the biological siblings. So these were exchanged back and forth. To date, this continues to occur. The goal is to continue to build rapport and connections between the child and the adoptive family of the siblings to eventually begin in-person visits. So what family finding can do for the community. The family finding team can assist in searching for family and/or community members for a child who has or will be removed from their home. The team provides cultural connections and completes kin out of care assessments. After the child is placed, the team provides support to the kin family to ensure the placement is successful. We can support families with a per diem to stabilize and maintain placements, and we can continue to explore family, community, and cultural connections in order to increase the circle of care and lifelong connections for children and youth. We also, as a team, continue to work on revamping forums, attending training, providing presentations to teams and departments of the work that we are doing, and ensure that our work promotes the circle of care needed to have the child at the center of the process. So this is another story of how we connected with a community in order to find the extended family for a child. So in 2019, there was a child born who was placed in one of our internal foster homes. She did very well in the foster home, but we had our obligation to continue to search for family members for this child. So mom initially did not give us a whole lot of information about her extended family, but did provide one potential family member who we did explore. But unfortunately, that family member was not in a position to present a plan and did not connect with us to do the assessments needed. So we continued to search and try and find extended family that we can connect with. And we eventually were able to get the information of an older sibling's foster family. This older sibling was continuing to reside with that foster family in Saskatchewan, and the family finder was able to speak with that foster parent who gave us a wealth of information about the siblings' family, extended family. So we reached out through Facebook to try and connect with some of these family members, and we had some success with that. And as we continued to do the detective work, we found more names and more contact information. We also spoke with the community, and they were able to provide us with the name and contact information for maternal grandfather. And I remember speaking to the worker after she had spoken with grandfather, and she said it was very emotional when he had found out that he had a granddaughter that he didn't know about. And he was very excited about being able to connect with her. So he spoke with his partner, got back to us very quickly and said he wanted to present a plan for her, which was so exciting for us. They began by having virtual visits, and our internal foster family worked very hard to facilitate the connection virtually between grandparents and this child. And it really says a lot about the support that we got from the foster family, from the whole team here in Ontario, as well as the support from Saskatchewan as well. So Saskatchewan completed the assessments required in order to approve them. And on September 20th, 2021, we received a final order to place this child into the care and custody of her grandparents. They came from Saskatchewan to Ontario and spent about 5 days here. They celebrated her second birthday here as well. And now she's in Saskatchewan with her grandparents. It's an awesome and very heartwarming story.
So some of the methods that we use when we're doing family finding, we're connecting with the bio parents to explore who they feel could support them and potentially care for the child if needed. We connect with the First Nations if they haven't already done so to ensure that they are actively involved in the decision-making. We use social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram when we have names but no other contact information. And when we are using social media, we use a very generic information. So we don't give any identifying information when we're using social media. We also connect with the youth and/or their worker to discuss how family finding could support them. And we do a thorough review of the file history because often there could be family members or a significant community member that may be identified in there. So some of the benefits of placing with family: it builds on an existing relationships and promotes stability for the child and youth. It minimizes the impact for a child being removed from their primary family and or community. It encourages and empowers parental involvement in decision-making and planning for the child and youth. And it increases the likelihood of unification with the primary family. And one thing I was just going to add, which I said earlier, it's just so natural if you can't be with your parents to be with family, that I think that's why children would have better outcomes.
So walking together with families. The family finding team places high value on working together with kin families as we view them as the experts of their own unique family situation. By honoring, respecting, and listening to families, we can weave a fabric of permanency around the child outside of adoption or remaining in long-term foster care. The family finding team continues to be creative in providing support to families that is tailored to each individual's family's unique needs. So as a kinship worker myself for many years, you have to remember that these families are not planning to take another child into their care. This often is happening when there's a crisis within the family. They may not have known about all the issues or concerns that the bio parents were facing. And it is our responsibility as an agency to support them as best we can. And I just found that the relationship that I had with these families was really important, and it was a two-way street. Like, I could support them, and I learned so much from the kinship families that I've worked with in the past. We really do have to honor them as their family and what they know about this child and what they need from them, and listen to them in regards to that. So currently, family finding is supporting 55 children with a monthly per diem. And again, these are children that are considered, their legal status is kin out of care. And along with the monthly per diems, the family finding continues to support families financially with startup funds and cultural supports on an as needed basis. The family finding team have significantly increased their social media presence, particularly on Facebook and Instagram. And we have had great success connecting with extended family through these outlets. We have had some great success with Facebook since we've had it up and running. We've also had some team events, which have been pretty significant for the team as well. So we celebrated Kinship Awareness Week in 2021 by providing blanket gift bags to families. So this included a fleece blanket, medicines, as well as a pamphlet on the 4 sacred medicines. The gifts were delivered in person to the families by either the family finder or the child and family wellbeing worker. And on March 3rd of this year, the family finding team held a virtual kinship gathering / lunch and learn, co-facilitated by Kevin Fujita. 10 caregivers joined the team for this event to talk about the importance of family. And it was a great opportunity for all of us to meet, and as well as for them to connect with other caregivers. We got some great reviews, and we're planning our next event for June. The team has also purchased cultural items to give to families as needed. These items include smudge bowls, rattles, dream catchers, and a diverse collection of books for children of all ages. The team has also purchased a collection of books that represent the Afro-Indigenous population that we serve as well.
So some more of our success stories. Family Finding has been actively involved in repatriating children with families, not just in Ontario, but also to other jurisdictions, such as Nevada, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and British Columbia. The next success story is a kin caregiver that I'm working with. She was going to write the story herself, but then felt she was more comfortable if I could share it for her. So I was working with this kin caregiver whose nephew was in care as the parents were not able to care for him at the time. She came forward with a plan that she would like to care for her nephew and wanted to begin the kinship process. I met with her and we completed the kinship assessment, and she began virtual visits with her nephew. Everything was ready to go. However, there was an issue with her housing as she was trying to get a unit that would accommodate everyone. This process was taking a very long time given the housing demand. So together with the kin, family finding team, child and family well-being, and the housing worker, we developed a plan with her that would allow her to have her nephew be placed in her current residence until she could secure another unit. She began in-person visits and her nephew was transitioned into her home. She has stated that everything is going really well and her nephew has adjusted quickly to being with her. She's very happy that her nephew is no longer in care and is back with family where he belongs.
So being creative. So we've had some, you can move on to the next slide, thanks. Some youth have just asked for information on their extended families, even though they may not feel ready to reach out to make a personal connection to them. So what the family finding worker will do is try to obtain as much information as possible through speaking with that child or youth, reviewing the file history and connecting with our identified community if we know who that is, as well as speaking with their worker. So we do use Genograms or GenoPro. All the family finders have access to GenoPro. And this is just like can be a part of their sacred bundle. So the Genogram just gives them as much information as we can about their family. Contact information, if we have it as well, can be provided. And this can be something that the child or youth can just have. And when they feel ready to do so, they can reach out to this, to their extended family if possible. It just gives them that answer about who their family is, what their connections are, what their Indigenous roots are. I know I have one myself, and I often go back to look at it and think about the connections that I have to those people, my ancestors. And like I said, it can become a part of their sacred bundle, so it's something that they will carry with them for life. So although we've been talking about how wonderful that this is, there are some challenges associated with family finding. One of them being that parents not wanting to provide information. They may be feeling that sense of shame and not wanting their family to know how much they are struggling. The stigma of working with a child welfare agency, that lack of trust because the history of child welfare with the Indigenous community in this country has a lot of trauma associated with it. Kin caregivers are hesitant to be involved with a child welfare agency for a lot of different reasons. Many extended family members may not be able to present a plan to care for another child as much as they want to, as they may be on their own healing journey and need to focus on themselves first. And a lot of the children and youth that we may be working with have been adopted by other agencies, and adoption laws can make it difficult to get information on adoptions, especially if the adoption was completed by that other agency. It may be very difficult to get that information because of their privacy and confidentiality laws. And when we are not able to get consents for family finding because biological parents have their own, are working through their own issues with working with child welfare. So from a legal perspective, there are some issues with when we can search and when we can't. And then equality with kin and care. Kin service families are often not included in supports that kin and care caregivers have access to. As I mentioned earlier, we've had the foster care, kinship care programs for quite some time, but kin service is actually fairly new within the province, as I mentioned earlier, in 2006, and it does not have the same supports as the more formal systems do. So that's the end of our presentation. I would just want to thank everybody for listening and hearing about it. I always like talking about the family finding program, and the whole team is very passionate and committed to finding these connections for children and youth. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Marianne. Miigwech. Okay, I thought sorry guys, my microphone wasn't working for a minute, but it's back. So thank you so much, Marianne. Thank you so much, Tammy. I really learned a lot from your presentation, and I also think it was beautiful. So really appreciate that. I see a few questions that have come in, and we'll get to the questions in the Q&A after our next couple of presentations. But for the audience, I'd keep them coming. I'm definitely happy to answer all your questions. I now want to introduce our agency's very own protocol droid, Mark Atanasoff, C3PO, who's coming to break down complex systems, which I think is perfect for a protocol droid. So welcome, Mark.
All right, thank you, Terry. And I just want to thank the speakers, Marianne and Tammy, for an excellent presentation. And we'll get to those questions. And so, yeah, so as we've been going through the learning series, we've been wanting to share our thoughts in terms of how we're thinking and where we're heading. And these are very complex systems that we're dealing with. And so we wanted to walk you through the technical framework. I was debating on C3PO or Jar Jar Binks, so we landed on C3PO. But so through this process, we want to simplify a very complex system. We want to bring more people into the conversation. We are shaping our model as we go, but we don't want to stop the conversations that happen here or elsewhere across community. And so we really think it's important to share our preliminary thinking. But one of the things that we went into this with is, that deep question of how do you reduce children in care? And so all the focus has always been around child welfare reform. But we thought maybe we got to look outside of child welfare just to sort of frame the context. And so one of the things that we look at is like reconciling child welfare within community. And we had mentioned stigma and shame. And that we're seeing that when we revise and revision child welfare, we see it as a resource for families as part of a healing journey. We want to remove that shame and re-traumatization in families. And we see that with the family finding program, it would be such a benefit if that stigma wasn't there. So that's something that we're mindful of as we go through this journey, that we still have to reconcile child welfare within our own community. And so that's something that we want to unpack together. Another pillar that we're looking at is community programs as a system. And so this is, if you kind of think about it, is if we don't reform child welfare but we're able to invest in community programs as a system, if we can improve poverty, addictions, mental health within community and look at those community level outcomes, we believe you'll have less contact within the child welfare system. And so that's something to think about. So what other investments do we have to make outside of the child welfare system that would actually have a positive impact on child welfare reform? So not all the answers are going to lie within reforming child welfare. It's going to be looking at other structures outside the system. Another pillar that we're looking at is family networks to thrive, is really making those investments into culture, into community, friends and family, and building those strengths. And what impact would that have on child welfare? And we think that building those investments and those resources would reduce child welfare involvement. So really child welfare reform is really just not about the system of child welfare. It's actually looking at things holistically. And we think that these will be great conversations to have as we go through this process together when we try to find these answers together. So that's the high level look that we're doing. So when we go a little deeper, some of the stuff that we're thinking of within the child welfare reforms is looking at task allocation. So child welfare has been around for 100 years, and we want to sort of look at the task allocation. So what are the tasks within the child welfare system? Do they need to be looked at? What tasks can be done outside the child welfare system? And then what tasks need to be collaborative, where you have to develop those protocols and collaborations and communications. And so, we really want to unpack those task allocations and really determine what needs to exist outside of the system, what needs to exist in the system, what needs to be shared, and how do we collaborate. The other one that we want to look at is prevention within the child welfare system. And so as we go through this learning series, we're finding that the stat that we use is like 97% of the children remain in the home when there's contact within the child welfare system. And how do we do wraparound? How do we involve organizations and community members outside of the child welfare system? And that's why we've labeled this as systems integration. And so how do we wrap around those services in a good way for those families? And we think there's opportunities there to unpack and have some really good conversation. Another pillar that we're looking at is tools and processes. And so as we had remarked before, like the only way to get into the child welfare system and to exit is through a tool. There's many more tools in the system that we present along the way on this journey. And none of them have been really validated by community. And so this is our opportunity to look at those tools and scrap the ones that we don't like and bring in the well-being tools and really look at things holistically, the way that we want to do things. The next one is staff well-being. Like we keep on hearing, from community members, when they have those amazing workers, they represent the system, they are the system, but an amazing staff and the support behind the staff goes a long way to really transforming the system. So we want to really unpack the mentorship, the training, caseloads, really how can we support staff in a really good way from an organizational standpoint that really makes a difference when we work with community. And so we think that there's a lot to unpack there as well. Another one of the pillars is decision validation, is in terms of every decision point that we have within the system, how do we make sure there's transparency, accountability, validation from community, and really making sure that we have the right approach around decisions, because those decisions impact families mightily. And so we want to make sure that we have the right processes there, grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing. So there's a lot to unpack there and have conversations around. Another one is family experiences, is really looking to make sure that people feel heard, listened to, that they're the experts in their own lives, that they feel partnered with, that we can return a phone call, on a timely manner, that people feel respected. So experiences is something that we really want to unpack. We don't want to wait till there's an inquest or an inquiry. We want to collect those experiences in real time. And when we're not having good experiences with families, how do we course correct and make sure that we have those opportunities? So that's something that we can also unpack together and really improve the system around. And then lastly, it's those outcomes. It's reducing those children in care, reducing duration of time in care, and really making sure that we can provide those resources to families and get those outcomes that we all want to get. And all this is grounded in the Indigenous worldview. It's in best interest of the child. It's self-determination. We mentioned Bill C-92. It's really, all this is grounded in what is important to community. It's the culture, it's the language, it's family, it's community. And grounding it in these Indigenous laws and Indigenous ways of knowing will change the way we do service. And that's the way it's grounded. So these are just a high level thoughts that we have. We're not saying that these are right or wrong, but we think that these will make great conversations here in this session, plus elsewhere. And it's something that we want to just keep the conversation going as we move this process forward. And I'll throw it back to Terry.
Thank you, Mark. And now we're going to welcome Vivian, who's been, listening to the presentation. And I always love when Vivian comes in and just speaks from, her wealth of wisdom and lived experience and doesn't have a slideshow. So Vivian, what are your reflections on, our family finding team and where we're at in this journey of these webinars?
Foremost, I just want to thank you all for coming in and listening to our series. I thought this piece was very important, this family finding, this kinship piece of child welfare, because children come into the system And sometimes children get lost in the system. Our grandparents and so forth ended up in the system. Some got placed overseas, some got placed over there, and we don't know what happened to some of our people. And you know, when you think about a child, family is the most important influence in a child's life when that child is born. So kinship and family finding is really important in our community. And sometimes we don't understand it as like parents and grandparents. We don't always understand that, you know, what is kinship? What is all of this? Why is this here? Why is that there? How come I'm not getting any money for this? How come they're getting money over there? Anyways, there's so many issues. And when I think about this nice Bill C-92 coming in where children are to be kept together, Indigenous children are to be kept together, and I think that's a good process. Our children should be together. They should be with our community. They should be among our First Nation people. Even that's another subject, because that's hard. You know, when you're looking at kinship care, I understand there's some families don't have very big families. Some people don't really have anybody. So it's really hard when you're looking for family. There are so many stories that we could share. You know, we could hear from a lot of people who have been through the system. And no question is wrong here. You know, go ahead and give us some questions. And that's what the important part of this learning series is to help us, help you, help the community, help our whole society. It's about gathering that information. Okay, let's look at it. You know, I'm really grateful for this kinship and family finding process, because it's a hard job. There's still adults that are looking for their families. There's still adults looking for their families. Culture is a big piece when putting children with somebody. You know, even if it's with a foster parent, that culture piece is so important. You know, get the child involved in something that is cultural to them. What does culture look like? You know, get that foster parent involved. You know, even our kinship people, our families are kind of having a hard time themselves. They're still hurting. Yeah, I probably, you know, I just keep thinking about this story over and over again about this. I met this one gentleman a few years back, and I've never seen him before, but somehow he was inside my circle. And as Aboriginal, like First Nations people, we just speak, you know, it's like, maybe it's our language, maybe it's the way our English is, but it's like, I see them and I said, who are you? Where'd you come from? You know, I said, how come you're here? You know, he says, uncle. And he wasn't really sure about that, eh? So I asked him, I said, okay, who's your family? You know, and he came back to tell me he found his family through doing some blood work. You know, and he was raised in a European family. And he's well into his late 40s now. He just recently found his family. But he says growing up as a kid, he always felt something was missing. something was missing and he hurt growing up. Yeah, until he found out he was First Nation. So he went to find his family. We actually had this young gentleman come and speak for us one time. You remember him, Terry? So yeah, he found his family and he went to that reserve. He went to a powwow to go inquire about, these people. And that is how he found his family. And the family finding piece, it's like, that's such a big thing. It's so important. Because our children get lost in the system through other agencies, through privacy, like they said. And it's so hard on our children. They're always looking for that missing piece. So I'm grateful. I'll say Chimiwech to you too for speaking on this subject, which I found so important because we should be doing this work. And to people who are listening through Zoom, give us some questions. We can go from there. Chimiwech Dinimib Zindoshik. Thank you so much for listening to me. Mia.
Miigwech Vivian, thank you. I always love listening to your perspectives, so miigwech for that. So we're going to move into the question and answer portion of our webinar. We have about half an hour and there's a few questions that have been sent in. So if, again, don't hesitate. And if you've got questions, we've got lots of time. I'm going to start with, there's a few questions that are around per diem. So I'm probably going to direct this to Marianne and Tammy. But one, maybe make some notes. What does per diem constitute and its limits? And are per diems provided to kin service caregivers, or is it only for kin and care providers? And then there's a sort of follow-up to that, but we'll start with that piece.
Okay, I can take that one. So they are provided to kin service caregivers. Kin and care providers do have their own separate per diems, and that's not part of what the family finding team does. So I can only focus on what kin service does. So we do provide caregivers, but this, as Jeffrey mentioned earlier on at the beginning of the presentation, this is a separate funding allocation that we have. It does not come from the ministry. And so it's not necessarily guaranteed. Now, very recently, as of last year, I think it was the fall of last year, the Ontario government did start providing minimal funding for kin service caregivers for startup as well as for per diems, but is not equitable in terms of what it is for kin and care at all. And they're often kin service caregivers. The needs of the child is not any different, whether your legal status is in care or out of care, the needs of the child are the same. So that's been, when I mentioned that it's not equitable between kin and care and kin out of care, that's what I was referring to. Yeah.
Thank you. Great answer. And then I guess the second part of that would be with the kin service amounts, is it in addition to temporary, and you might not know this, it's technical even for me, but is it in addition to the temporary care allowance from OW or the child tax benefits that they're eligible to?
Yeah, so we do also look to any other supports that the government can provide, such as the temporary care allowance and the child tax credit. So it is over and above that. So it's not one amount that we necessarily give for each family. We have to look at their financial situation, what other supports they're getting before we make the decisions as to how long and how much that we are able to provide. And it's
Awesome.
reviewed. Yeah, it's reviewed on a regular basis as well.
Awesome, thank you. And then probably again for Marianne and Tammy. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
I just want to say one thing about this too, because, Marianne's point about this inequity between in-care placements and out-of-care placements is a really important one. And it's one that we want to continue to work together with community to advocate for change around, because we're still in a situation where in-care placements are better resourced, right? And we had to go to seek out additional funding, which we're desperately trying to hang on to try to develop some type of equity for out of care placements. And it's deeply problematic, right? And so I just want folks to know that it's something that we are advocating for, but I think there's much more room for conversation together with communities and certainly together with First Nations around continuing to ensure that funding equity is brought to outer care placements. Mark, I see your hand. I don't know if you want to say anything else around that, but it's a point of advocacy that we need more work on.
Yeah, I mean, it was just more of a general conversation. Like, so we haven't put it in our, our model, if you will, but it is around funding. But it, like, you can have perverse incentives in the funding model from the province, and then there's also substantive equity in terms of, are we getting sufficient funding? So there's a lot to unpack there. So there's a lot more homework to be done, but those have been brought up through the Sustainability Commission, through other findings. But those are some of the things that we are aware of, is those perverse incentives that can drive kids into care, and then the substantive equality issue that needs to be dealt with to reduce children in care. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I think we need to do a little bit more homework around that one.
And then I guess one more question that's sort of in the same theme. In general, are there other financial supports available for families?
So I think the other supports are what we mentioned, the temporary care allowance as well as the child tax credit are the main one. There's also subsidized daycare as well that we can access.
I think this is where our holistic services come in, right? Like, as an integrated agency that provides multiple supports. I mean, there are additional resources available through, whether it's our subsidized daycare programs at Native Child or elsewhere, right? Whether it's our summer camps or food courts or other supports that are available through other programs. But yeah.
And holistic services is an upcoming webinar in and of itself. So
Yeah,
I'm sure that we'll get to hear lots about that.
Right, clinical services at no cost, the rest of it, all those supports. And we will, thank you for highlighting that, Terry, because we will be unpacking that.
I was just going to add too that sometimes getting the child tax credit does take a while. So that's why the per diem is helpful, right? Because sometimes it takes a while for the Ontario Works temp care allowance and the child tax credit to get going. So the per diem is kind of a way to supplement in the meantime.
Thanks, Tammy. Okay, so next question. Oh, Vivian, go ahead.
I was just thinking a lot about, because people are curious. They want to know about the support services that they need when a child comes into their care, or a family member who is involved in the child welfare system comes in our care. I think a lot of people wonder financially because they're having a hard time financially, but yet the only thing you're allowed to get is that child tax benefit and a $200 amount from Ontario Works. So our families struggle. They struggle, and I know we have support service that can help in food, but you got to look at the whole picture. The whole picture, getting a case manager involved, maybe help them with that whole piece of housing. So it's really huge. It's a big piece. Say there's an only child who lost their mother, and then this grandmother is put in place to take care of that child. And there's no support services for that kind of thing. So we have to really look at our support services a lot better. It's an important piece because our families, a lot of them live in poverty, and we need the emotional piece, the mental piece, the spiritual piece. All that has to be taken care of. They're hurt, they're grieving. Yeah. So keep those questions coming in, guys. Maybe.
And I'm glad it's recorded, Vivian, because Jeffrey used the word advocacy, right? And I think that's some of our work, and powerful statements like what you made, I think really do make a case for that advocacy, right? For what do families need, and how can we support them in getting those concrete needs in place? So thank you.
I just want to add to that as well. The support that we give, the funding is critical. There's no doubt about that, especially in the time of this pandemic when the cost of living has raised so significantly in a couple of years. But it's also the emotional support that we can give them as we walk alongside our kin families as well, this journey that they're taking. Like I said, often at times of crisis, that's really significant for them as well. We hear that time and again, that they have this one worker that's dedicated to them that can walk with them on this journey. So that's also really important.
Thank you, Marianne. Okay, I think that's all the questions probably related to sort of like funding or finance and that kind of thing. One of the next question, I thought this was an interesting one. Can you give an example as to when you cannot search for kin?
So when we are not involved in court and parents do not sign consents for us. So that's something that we try and work through with parents. Like often the family finder will meet directly with parents to try and, allay their fears a little bit, what their concerns are about with signing those consents. But we have to respect where they are at as well. It's a bit of a gray area though, too, because we have this obligation to do those searches. So we may refer ourselves to our legal department to kind of work through when we can and cannot.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. Questions about home assessments, which I know was part of the process. How long would it take for a home assessment to be completed?
Tammy, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So there's the home assessment where it's doing the home safety. So checking the home for certain things, seeing the space that the child would be in. But then there's also, which that one doesn't take that long, right? You meet with the kin, you go through the home, you look for, the carbon monoxide, fire extinguishers, those kind of things. Make sure that everything's safe. Things that aren't safe, we can provide that, right? We're not going to not approve somebody because they're lacking something. We would help with that. But then, so that would be the home safety check. But then there's also the criminal record checks that we have to do and a CAS record check. So sometimes that can take long. If a family member did have a history, we have to get that from the other agency. And sometimes that's what holds up the process, is getting those records and then reviewing it and then talking with the kin about that history, right? So it depends on what information we need to get from other agencies and how fast in different jurisdictions you can get the criminal record check a lot faster than say in Toronto. Sometimes in Toronto it does take a lot longer. So there's no set like time really. Sometimes it can go quite quickly and other times it can take a while.
Thank you, Tammy. Question from Johnson. How many members are in the family finding team? Did this team receive any specialized training? And is there an expectation that each worker in the agency engages in this work of family connection? So maybe the first part's for Marianne and Tammy, and then maybe Jeffrey, you want to talk about the last part of the question?
Yeah, so there are 6 family finders on the team, myself as a supervisor, and we also have an admin person that's dedicated specifically to our team. We started off with 5 members of the team, and then it was increased as well. Sorry, what else was related to that question? Oh, specific training. Yes, we do have attended some training specifically related to searching for family. Kevin Campbell is well known in North America, providing the basis for family finding, and the team had taken his training earlier on before I came onto the team. And then we also did some training through Waterloo CAS. It's called 360 Engagement, and that was specifically about again connecting to family. How do you support a youth when they're searching for family? So those are the specific skills related to that. It's not something that family finders often will have experience with. It's something that they learn as they take on the position. Unless they've come, let's say, from our foster care system, like I did myself as well. Like I had experience with Safe and Pride, as did Tammy. So we were familiar with the assessments that you need for both in care and out of care as well.
You want to say anything about the expectation, Marianne? I mean, you talked about it a little bit about the process is triggered and then family finders are involved, right? And I mean, there's unquestionably an expectation that all of our child and family well-being workers are reaching out, to members of the team to engage in family finding work. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that happens?
Yeah. So even though we may hear about a family initially, we may not be able, as we said before, there may be barriers to us getting started right away searching for family. So we do depend a lot, especially on child and family well-being, to provide us that information on the family. So our team has been working directly with child and family well-being in regards to, and it is an ongoing obligation, as Bill C-92 says, it's an ongoing obligation to continue to be searching for those connections for families. And same thing with on the long-term care team. We look to them to help guide us in this process. We can take it over for them, but we look to them. And it's, again, it has to continue throughout the life of the family, the child and the youth being involved with us.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. Bunch of questions that are similarly themed around, I guess, access to your services. So one that came up in a couple of places is, can children and youth aged out of care or who were formerly in adopt situations access connection to their ancestry through family finding?
So we don't normally deal with people that have aged out of care. Unfortunately, that's not what family, we're dealing with the children and youth that are currently have been removed or potential of being removed from their family and disconnected.
I think a lot of people in the audience are really loving the work that you're doing and probably realizing that they have either family members or community members that they're working with who would love to be able to find ways of connecting to their family. Do you have any kind of general recommendations if someone was going to do a search for family members? How would you go about it? Might be putting you on the spot.
I think I would try and start with mapping out any family that they are aware of and they can think of, even like a name, what their relationship was, maybe where they lived, what age they were when they met that person, and go from there. And even do sometimes doing like kind of a storyline, because then it brings back things that you might remember, right? Like you might remember, oh, I remember once this auntie came to visit and her name was this. So if you can get all that information, and then Facebook is really a good way to search, because even if you have somebody's first name and then maybe you try the last name that the child or youth has, often things will come up. And then if you look at their friends and family, you can find other members. So I think it's a good way to try and do a timeline and start with any names that they might know, right? Or even places they've lived, right?
Yeah, that sounds like a great process. Thank you, Tammy. Mark, you have your hand up?
Yeah, because I think this actually leverages like some good examples, and I'll see if I can remember them. So one of them is like the collaboration piece. So when we're looking at the task allocations, and so, work will be divided amongst different teams within externally to Native child. And so building those collaborative processes so people can collaborate, looking at shared outcomes is really going to be, I think, an opportunity for us to look at. So that's one. The other one is also looking at the differences between, say, family finding and family networks. And so if we were able to do like a landscape review, how many programs are dedicated to building and strengthening families, which there's a lot out there, but that's something that we can look at, not just here at Native Child, but elsewhere, and really looking at those programs of building family networks and strengthening those. The other one is looking at, in terms of the allocations of tasks, is should some services be outside of the child welfare and made available outside of the system, right? And those are the things when we look at task allocation, is something like family networks, family finding. Can that exist outside of the system or in both, right? And so these are the things, these are the challenging conversations we have to look at so that folks can get access to services, not just within the child welfare envelope, but also outside of it. Because we want to be preventative, right? And we want to build those strength, we want to strengthen those networks so that folks don't need necessarily the child welfare services. So these are all things that we want to consider and have conversations around.
I know, Tammy, when you were just giving your sort of maybe guidelines of how to go about looking for family, you mentioned social media, and it came up in the presentation as well as Facebook as a tool that supports your work. So we do have a question about social media. So when it comes to social media, does your organization have accounts? And I can talk about that in a minute if you want, but how do you approach with the lack of trust that parents, families may have?
So before we would reach out on social media to anybody that we might have potentially found, we would have to have consent from the parents to do that. Unless, again, like Marianne said, we were involved in court, then we could reach out. And we do a very generic message. We don't say anything involving the situation. It might just say, that I'm a family finder from Native Child and Family. And that I might be working with a child that they're connected to, and that I would like them to give me a call or reach out to me. And then I would provide my phone number and my email. So it's very generic. We don't give any identifying information. Like I wouldn't put the child's name or anything or the family that I'm working with. So we do have a family finding Facebook page, and that's where we send the messages from.
And the agency has a number of Facebook pages as well and Instagram accounts. So there's like what we call sort of the main channel. So if you look up Native Child and Family Service of Toronto on like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, you'll find accounts. But then like there's the Family Finding Facebook. The hubs have a lot of their own like Facebook and Instagram accounts. The Native Youth Resource Center actually very lively on social media. There's like tons of great content that that so many teams on the site, so many teams across the agency put together. So if you guys are into social media, which probably most of you are, then I would definitely look up some of the Instagram channels for sure.
Yeah, and all our messages are through the private messages, right? Like it's not on the public Facebook account.
And I think
Thanks.
we all know the benefits of children being with kin families as opposed to being in, long-term foster care. So I think the team, when we meet with parents, we can explain what the benefits are and really just try in a very compassionate and gentle way, just to provide them with, this is the option that you have that can provide the best care and keep this child connected to you while you focus on yourself, on your healing journey. So I think that that's a good way to approach it with our parents that may be struggling with that piece of working with a child welfare agency and that lack of trust.
Just to add on that too, I think also, it's important to let parents know that it might not necessarily be that we're reaching out for family to look for a placement, but if the parents are on their journey of recovery, maybe we're reaching out to family to help build that support network so that when the child does return home, they have those family supports that maybe they didn't reach out to for whatever reasons, right? So it's not necessarily just looking for a placement, but really building up that network of supports.
And just because a child may be placed in a kin placement doesn't mean that that's their forever home either. We've had so many children that this has been where they have been staying for a little bit of time while parents have been on their recovery journey, and then they're reunified with parents. So that happens just as much as children are staying, in with the kin homes as well. So it can go either way. And there's even times when even years down the road where it may take a little bit longer for one parent to get to that point where they can provide care. But it can happen if we do this in a good way and maintain those connections with parents, if at all possible, then that is something that can happen. And I've seen it happen. I've experienced that myself personally with some of the families I've worked with.
Thanks, Marianne. Thanks, Tammy. I just looked at the clock. I didn't realize how close we are to time. There's a couple questions in the chat. I see a lot of them are actually from from coworkers at Native Child. So I'm going to say if you're Native Child staff and I didn't get to your question, I'm so sure that Marianne or Tammy would be happy if you sent them an email and they can talk to you about some of the questions that you've had. Because there's one here that I think is really significant to get to. And this is probably for Mark and Jeffrey, but Indigenous laws need to be incorporated, especially within the tools and processes. And I wonder how this is being discussed and processed considering Bill C-92 and the need for community involvement through the child welfare reform process.
It's a great question, 100%. I'll start, and then Mark, if you want to add anything, by all means, go ahead. So we're in such an exciting time where, I mean, so I'll start by saying we do have a band engagement liaison officer. We are in conversations with First Nations around the development of their laws under Bill C-92. You know, and as an urban agency, our role is to take direction from First Nations when they develop those laws, right? So there will be certain circumstances in which First Nations develop laws, and those laws have different tools. And when that happens, that's fantastic, because those are the tools we'll use, right? And those are tools that are vetted by and directed and created by those communities. That's the best case scenario. For all of the community members that aren't captured under those laws, our jurisdiction, our mandate comes from the province, right? And as Mark said earlier, none of those tools have been vetted by community. We know that those tools are, well, I'll just say those tools play a significant part in the continued overrepresentation of Indigenous folk in the child welfare system. We need to change them, right? So this learning series is an information sharing forum that's meant to lead to a whole bunch of community engagement sessions and conversations about how we change those tools together, right? And so Mark and his team have been leading a lot of those community engagements and community advisories. We have a couple of them going right now. Mark, maybe you can talk a little bit about how some of those conversations are going to lead to us actually being able to go to the ministry and piloting new tools and testing out new approaches that in fact have been developed with community.
Yeah, because I think we can do stuff through the agency, but it's where we need to advocate and collaborate with other sister organizations, with community, because we do need to advocate together to either whether it's substantive equity to get the dollars and resources we need, if we want to change a tool, if we want to incorporate things. These are the things that we'll have to work in collaboration for sure. And that's where it's a very complex system. And we'll have to work with First Nations to look at the urban issues. So when they're doing their laws, they have consideration for urban considerations, because we're going to respect those laws and implement those laws through those coordination agreements. And so there's a lot of complexities here. But in order, going back to that question, we can change. We have that framework and we have the tools. The two things that pop out, and this is where that gets complex, is one, it's the best interest of the child, and decisions, right? So those aren't tools. Those are the ones where it's the Indigenous ways of knowing. It's the ephemeral things that aren't necessarily written down, but it's our actions. And so those are the things that we need to unpack. It's best interest of the child and decisions. And those are the things that we need to consider outside of tools. That is going to be some really interesting conversations as we go through this process of decolonization and reform. So those are the things that we also have to look at. And those are part of our focus areas. We want transparency around decisions. And best interest of the child needs to be further unpacked.
And the Association of Native Child and Family Service Agencies of Ontario, of which we are a part, are doing some of that broader sector level advocacy, working with the ministry, saying we need new tools that are directed by Indigenous community members and agencies. So Terry, I realize we're almost at 2:30, so I'm going to have to cut myself off, though I have a lot more to say about this. Yeah.
That's probably a whole presentation in and of itself. I'm going to slide one more in because I think it's probably relevant to a lot of the audience. The secured funding for this initiative, and I'm assuming that they're talking about the family finding in particular. Is it restricted to children who self-identify, or do they have to meet the criteria of First Nations as outlined by the government? Can it expand to children of Metis and Inuit heritage? And they're talking about this in the context of the barriers that are existing within Jordan's principle.
So it does apply to families who self-identify as well, not just those that are, let's say, registered or have that solid community connection. Yeah.
That's because we have funding from multiple funding sources. So the funding that's coming from Indigenous Services Canada, we can only apply to people that meet a certain definition. We're backfilling funding from other sources as an agency to make sure that no one's left out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, everybody. I do, like I said, there's a couple questions we didn't get to, and I hope that you can feel free to email Tammy or Marianne. I want to turn it over to Vivian. I think for any final thoughts or reflections, Vivian, and then if you can bring us to closing.
I could definitely close for you. It's been a very interesting afternoon. I've enjoyed listening to everything that has been brought forth to us. But one thing that did come to mind is children, when they come into care, I understand the importance of that Bill C-92 in keeping our children with family or community or First Nation. And I was thinking about, well, what does that really mean? You know, and then I started thinking about the bigger picture about First Nation. We bring children in. A lot of our foster homes are non-Indigenous. You know, it's a hard process looking at that tool of like assessing families. And, you know, I remember looking at that tool one time, the papers were like this. It's like, that's a lot of paperwork to become a foster parent, you know? So I think a lot of our people don't understand, you know, that terminology of all those things and all the work they have to do in caring for a child. So we have to go to outside resources sometimes, you know. So I'm really grateful that we have foster parents who can take care of our children, bringing them to culture, you know, bringing them to our social nights, being able to do Zooms, providing that teaching to whatever that child needs. So I'm really grateful for that. And with that, I want to say some closing words. Well, to my creator, I want to thank him. Shimigwech Shwemnero, Kinegego Mampi Nangwa Mijian. Shimigwech Tego, Kinegondak Neno, Quinakwak Mampi, Abibzancheat. Abchuga Snug Ziok Nangud Nang, Womenakiat. Shimigwech Sigo Kidego Mampi Bzindojin. Shimigwech Gawin Nibi, now Micham. Thank you, Creator, for bringing us here today. Thank you for helping us work in a good way. You know, it's not always easy, our job. So I thank you for that, for giving us those ears to listen, and for bringing all these people together to come and hear us. And I also thank you for that water that we put in our bodies today, and to those animals who help us as well, and for the food that we ate today. Thank you, everybody.
Vivian, thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Marianne and Tammy. Thank you to all of the background people. There's quite a number of folks in the background too, and I just want to acknowledge communications and events for the support, and IT for the support that they give to these webinars. I want to let everybody watching know that our next scheduled webinar is Tuesday, June 28th at 1 o'clock. So look forward to seeing you all there. This session has been recorded and it'll be posted on the Native Child and Family Services of Toronto webpage probably by Monday, sometime in the next couple of days. And you can watch all of the webinars. They're all posted there. So appreciate everybody for joining us today. Appreciate the good questions. I hope you all learned something. I know I did. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Miigwech, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.